Okay, so you've decided that you're going to take your strength and conditioning training seriously. So you went out and got yourself one of these. You even ponied up and bought a pair of these. While those two pieces of equipment are absolutely essential to any strength and conditioning program, they are not nearly as important as this, the training log. Wondering what the heck I'm talking about? Well, let's dive into it. It doesn't look fancy, it's just a simple composition notebook, but this is an extremely powerful tool if it's used properly. So I kind of cheated here, and I wrote everything that I normally put in a training log, and I insist that my trainees put into their training log up on this whiteboard. And I've broken it down into 3 categories. Category 1 is obviously the training variables. This is the exercise type, the load that you're using or weight on the bar, the amount of reps, the amount of sets, the amount of rest period, and the outcome. Meaning, did you get your entire set of 5, or did you end up getting 4 reps and on the 5th rep, grinding for 5 seconds before finally putting the bar down on the safeties? That's the outcomes. The other category is here, training notes. Now, training notes, I would say, is not nearly as important as the next category, but it is important. For example, what time of day did you train? Some people train at different times of day, and they notice that they train better or worse depending on how late in the day it is. Me personally, I seem to train the best right around 11 o'clock to say 3 o'clock. Early in the morning, not nearly as beneficial as later in the afternoon. If it gets too late, I'm really kind of in bad shape as well. Nutrition status. Well, how many calories that you have in you leading into a training routine can definitely affect your training. For example, if you're training first in the morning and you haven't had anything to eat, that could absolutely affect how your training is going to go. Just as importantly, think about carbohydrates, which is one of the main performance-based macronutrients. How many grams of carbs did you manage to put in your system before you trained? If you had a breakfast and a snack and lunch before training, and that last meal was relatively carb heavy, you might actually have a great training routine, but you want to pay attention to these things to see how your body reacts. Sleep history. Now, this is super important, but not always something that we can control, particularly the amount of hours of sleep that we get, but the quality of sleep that we get, we can ultimately impact more, and that's something to pay attention to. Remember, when you're sleeping, you're recovering. That's when your body's actually improving its fitness the most, is actually during your sleep time. So paying attention to the quantity of your sleep and the quality of your sleep is super important, and something that you may want to just make note of and see if there's a trend that's related to how well you've been sleeping and what your training outcomes have been. Training stress, your stress rating. Stress rating means how stressful has your life been ultimately recently. Stress has to be factored in. If you've got a big lift set to happen this week and you are under a tremendous amount of stress, that can affect your training outcomes. So when you're looking at that kind of information, you can't figure out why is it that why I wasn't able to get this deadlift today. It may be related to some of these factors, and it's important to pay attention to them, because if you've got big training sessions that are important for you to get, you may want to try to manipulate some of these things so that when that time comes, you're stacking the deck in your favor. Training observations. This is probably the most important part that I see that people miss. And the training observations are things like form deviations. So if you're doing a squat, are you noticing that you're in your toes and struggling to get out of the bottom of the squat? And then the next most important thing is the deviation cause. Why did you end up in your toes at the bottom of that squat? Did you allow your knees to slide forward as you hit the bottom, or were you holding them back once you got halfway down? That's important to pay attention to. How would you know this though? It's really important that you know how to get this information. Well, we'll talk about it in another video, but using your camera on your phone is one of the best ways to collect this information, identify what's going on, and then the next part is to figure out what is the deviation, fix, or cue that you want to apply. What is it that I need to do to fix this form deviation? I've looked at the video, I identified that my knees are sliding forward at the bottom of my squat and my heels are coming up off the ground, and as a result I'm struggling to get that bar back to the top. I know that I have to keep my knees back, so what I'm gonna do is I'm going to cue myself to hold my knees back once I get halfway down into that squat. This kind of information is the information that we want to carry into, well, all of this information needs to be carried into the next training session, but this is the part where I see people skip over and glaze over and unfortunately end up repeating the same mistakes over and over, or trying to unfortunately learn the same lessons session after session, workout after workout. The idea is if you're doing something today that you've identified as the main focus of today, whatever form deviation that you're looking to improve upon to make your lifts better, you would be very well advised to make note of that so that in future training sessions, you don't have to repeat that process. The second you start warming up with your empty bar on your squats, for example, go back at your training log, look at what observations that you had from last time and say, okay, I remember that I was having tough time keeping my knees back far enough to not end up in my toes. So as I'm warming up right now, I'm gonna be really diligent about thinking about that cue, which is hold my knees back in the bottom half. So as you're starting to warm up, every single rep is not only an opportunity to get your body up to temperature, but it's also to get your brain and your body keyed into what we want to do better from last session. Once you've done that, by the time you get to your work weight, chances are you've got that ironed out. And you'll start to observe that maybe something else now has to be addressed since that's been taken care of. Perhaps it's a speed issue. Okay, well, it looks like I've managed to keep my knees back, but I notice that at the very bottom, I'm getting loose and I'm kind of dive bombing into the bottom of my squat. And it's causing me to get stuck down there. But you've already reconciled the other things, so now you can go ahead and move down the hierarchy in the list of what is the next most important thing to address. You would write down notes on that and do that for the next session. Next session you come in during your warm-ups, you look back at your previous squat session, look at what notes that you were working on, and try to make sure that that is ironed out by the time you get to your work set.
So this is Miss Doreen. She's probably one of the best that I've got when it comes to training, taking it seriously, and using her training log. 61 years old, 115 pounds.
What are we focused on?
Just crushes it.
Finding the point, testing it, like bring it out of the, and then finding the point up there.
Yeah, testing what?
Testing where the bar should be over my shoulders.
That's what I need you to say.
You can see here, this is one of my early training logs. Very simple in terms of information. The sets, the reps, the exercises to be done, the load, the date. If you're just starting out, this is probably what your training log is going to look like. You'll get many workouts on the same page, and that'll be good enough. This, in contrast, is a very, very detailed version of it. Sleep quality, sleep hours, stress score, motivation levels, calories from the day prior, all the day prior's macros, the time of day, how much water, very, very detailed information on each and every one of the lifts. Once you're more advanced, you'll probably get up to this point.
All of these pieces of information here, the training variables, the training notes, and the training observations are extremely important pieces of information to take note of. Now, this shouldn't be a frustrating and overwhelming process. Very simple notes is all that it takes. And you don't have to do it all at once. You can develop this over time. But start with the basics. Obviously, training variables need to be written down. Right? We can't hope to progress what we don't measure. So this is the way of measuring what work that you've done so that we can progress it into the future. So this is the first piece of information that you absolutely have to get in there. I would say the second in this order is the training observations, because this is how you're going to improve your lifting capability. Right? It may even be on your conditioning. There may be observations that you're making in your conditioning form or anything of that nature. Things that you want to work on improving. Because remember, it's not just stress recovery adaptation that improves us, it's also work on the skills of training. So this may be an area that you want to focus on next. And just first trying to identify where your form deviations are. And then obviously the training notes. Now there's a really important portion that I want to talk about when it comes to the training notes. When it comes to training notes, it's super important that although we do pay attention to things like the time of day that you train, the nutrition status, your sleep history, and your stress rating, we could get into how to rate these things on another video, but it's important to notice these things, but at the same point, it's important that you don't end up becoming crippled. Walking in and writing down that like, hey, I had a bad sleep day, I don't want that to be the reason that we then just say, chuck it, and this workout's gonna be a bust, because you may perform very fine. So it's important to not become too sensitive. And that's kind of the danger of doing this. So it's important to know this information so you can stack the deck in your favor. But if you come in and you notice that some of those things are off, don't necessarily assume that you're gonna have a bad training day, because that may not be the case. All right, well, I hope this helps you, and maybe sometime in the future I'll get into another video that kind of discusses how to do this more specifically, like how do you write sets, reps, and time. How do you get a stress rating or kind of, track your stress levels and sleep history. Some of those things that you may want to do, and we will definitely get into the form, cues, and fixes at some time in the future. But I hope this helps you in learning how to use your training journal or your training log to improve your outcomes and make the most of your time that you're just putting into the gym in your strength and conditioning routine. I'm Coach Jason. It has been a pleasure to talk to you about this today. Hey, if you like this video, do me a huge favor. Go ahead and subscribe right there. And if you want to see more videos like this, click over here. I've got another video loaded that I've put up here, and I really appreciate your support. By the way, if you do subscribe, do me a favor. Go ahead and click on that little bell icon, and this way you'll get notifications when I post new content. I'd love to hear comments down below, things that you want me to talk about in the future, what you thought of this video. Tell me if you think I'm just completely full of it. I'm cool with that too. Also, don't forget to subscribe, and if you wouldn't mind, if you'd like rather, you can find me on Instagram, on Facebook. I'll post the links to those social media sites so you can follow me there as well. And until next time, keep training.